The silent threat. When Earth discovered it wasn't alone. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning at 3:47 a.m., Earth Standard Time. Dr. Sarah Chen was the first to see it. She had been working the night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station in New Mexico, doing what she had done for the past 8 years, staring at screens filled with cosmic noise, hoping to find something meaningful. Most nights brought nothing but the usual background radiation of the universe. But this night was different. The signal was clear and deliberate. Mathematical sequences that could not occur naturally. Repeating patterns that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Sarah's hands trembled as she verified the readings 3 times before reaching for the emergency communication line. Within 2 hours, every major space agency on Earth knew the truth. Humanity was not alone in the universe. The signal came from a distance of 42 light-years. It had been traveling through space for decades before reaching Earth. The message was simple once decoded. It was a warning. A species called the Zorathians had sent it as an act of mercy. They told humanity that the galaxy was ruled by an organization called the Interstellar Governance Union. The IGU controlled 3,000 star systems and had existed for over 50,000 years. They maintained order through strict laws and absolute power. The rules of the galaxy. According to the Zorathian message, the IGU had one fundamental rule for new species. Once a civilization developed faster than light communication or travel, they had exactly 100 years to prove themselves worthy of joining galactic society. During this century, the new species would be observed and judged. They would be tested on their technology, their social structure, their treatment of other life forms, and their potential threat level to established civilizations. Species that passed the evaluation were welcomed into the IGU with limited rights and heavy restrictions. They could trade with other members, travel designated space lanes, and settle approved worlds. But they would never hold real power. They would never vote on important decisions. They would exist as permanent junior members in a system designed to keep them weak and dependent. Species that failed the evaluation faced a darker fate. The IGU would quarantine their home system, preventing all contact with the wider galaxy. Slowly and methodically, the failing species would be allowed to destroy itself through war, disease, or environmental collapse. The IGU had learned long ago that direct extermination created martyrs and inspired rebellion. It was easier to let doomed civilizations fade away quietly while the galaxy forgot they had ever existed. The Zorathians had failed their evaluation 3 centuries ago. They had been too aggressive, too unwilling to submit to IGU authority. Now they lived in isolation on their dying world, watching their population decline generation by generation. They sent their warning to Earth as a final act of defiance. They wanted humanity to know what was coming. They wanted someone, somewhere, to break the cycle that had enslaved the galaxy for 50 millennia. Earth's impossible choice. The world governments met in emergency sessions that lasted for weeks. Leaders argued about what should be done. Some wanted to immediately begin preparing for the IGU evaluation. They proposed global unity initiatives, massive technological research programs, and diplomatic preparations. If humanity had 100 years, they could use every moment to become the perfect species the IGU wanted to see. Others argued for a different approach. They pointed out that the evaluation system was designed to be unwinnable for truly independent species. The IGU did not want equals or partners. They wanted subjects who would accept their place in the established order. Any species strong enough and united enough to pass the evaluation would be seen as too dangerous to admit. Any species weak enough to be acceptable would be too vulnerable to survive the process. President Alexandra Morrison of the United Earth Coalition spoke the thought that everyone was avoiding. They have given us a choice between slavery and extinction, she said during the final summit meeting. We can spend a century trying to please masters who will never accept us, or we can use that century to prepare for war. The room fell silent. War against an empire that controlled 3,000 star systems. War against technology 50,000 years more advanced than Earth's best weapons. War against an enemy that could probably destroy humanity with a fraction of their total forces. It seemed like madness. But as the leaders looked at each other across the conference table, they saw something unexpected in each other's eyes. They saw determination. The Century Project begins. Humanity chose defiance. The decision was made in secret, known only to the highest levels of government and military leadership. Publicly, Earth would play along with the evaluation process. They would send diplomatic messages into space, expressing gratitude for the IGU's attention and eagerness to join galactic society. They would appear cooperative and harmless. Privately, every resource humanity possessed would be redirected toward a single goal: survival. Scientists were pulled from universities and corporations to work on classified projects. Military budgets expanded to unprecedented levels. Space exploration programs accelerated dramatically. The world economy was restructured around technologies that did not yet exist. Commander Michael Reynolds was chosen to lead the military aspect of the Century Project. He was 42 years old, a career naval officer who had commanded vessels in 3 different regional conflicts. He was known for unconventional thinking and a refusal to accept defeat even when facing overwhelming odds. His superiors believed that if anyone could prepare humanity for an impossible war, it would be Reynolds. His first briefing on the project lasted 9 hours. Engineers explained the vast gap between human technology and IGU capabilities. Their ships could cross the galaxy in weeks while humanity's fastest vessels needed decades to reach nearby stars. Their weapons could destroy planets while Earth's most powerful bombs could barely scratch a city. Their shields could withstand temperatures hotter than the sun while human armor melted under sustained laser fire. "So we cannot match them," Reynolds said when the briefing concluded. "We cannot build faster ships or stronger weapons or better defenses. Not in 100 years, probably not in 1,000 years." He stood and walked to the window of the underground facility, looking up at the small square of sky visible from below. "Then we need to fight a kind of war they have never seen before. We need to fight like humans. The weapons nobody expected." The Century Project developed along 2 parallel paths. The first path was obvious and expected. Humanity built the best conventional military they could manage with limited time and resources. New spacecraft with improved engines and weapons. Better training for soldiers who might face alien enemies. Defensive installations on Earth and the Moon to protect humanity's home system. But the second path was something different entirely. It was based on a simple observation that military historians had noted throughout human history. Advanced civilizations with superior technology often lost wars to supposedly inferior opponents. The Romans with their professional legions fell to Germanic tribes. The British Empire with its modern weapons lost colonies to determined rebels. Technological advantage mattered, but it was not everything. Humanity's secret weapon would be asymmetry. They would not try to fight the kind of war the IGU expected. Instead, they would create chaos, confusion, and fear using methods that ancient civilizations would not anticipate. The IGU had fought wars for 50,000 years, but they had fought them according to established rules between recognized powers. They had never faced an enemy who ignored all the rules because they had nothing to lose. Dr. James Park headed the Asymmetric Warfare Division. He was a former Special Forces operator who had earned 3 PhDs while recovering from combat injuries. His team included everyone from computer hackers to evolutionary biologists to psychological warfare specialists. Their job was to find weaknesses that conventional military thinking would miss. They started with biology. The IGU contained thousands of different species, each with unique physiological characteristics. What if humanity could develop viruses or bacteria that targeted specific alien biology while leaving others unharmed? It would not be a weapon of mass destruction but rather a weapon of precise terror. Imagine an IGU fleet where suddenly one species began falling ill while their allies remained healthy. The paranoia and suspicion that would create could be more destructive than any bomb. They continued with culture. The IGU had maintained its empire for 50 millennia. That kind of stability required rigid social structures and absolute belief in established authority. What if humanity could introduce ideas that undermined that stability? Concepts of individual freedom, questioning authority, and resisting oppression. These ideas would spread like viruses through communication networks, slowly poisoning the foundations that held the empire together. They expanded into technology. The IGU's advanced systems would be networked and interconnected in ways that primitive human systems were not. This sophistication created vulnerabilities. A computer virus designed to spread through quantum communication networks could potentially affect thousands of worlds simultaneously. It would not destroy their technology, but it could corrupt data, create false sensor readings, and generate system-wide confusion at critical moments. Training the impossible. While scientists developed new weapons, the military prepared new soldiers. But these would not be ordinary troops trained for conventional combat. These would be specialists prepared for missions that sounded like science fiction nightmares. They would be the humans who went into alien territory alone or in small groups to accomplish objectives that entire armies could not achieve. Lieutenant Maria Santos was among the first volunteers. She was 26 years old, born in Brazil, and had served in the Space Force for 4 years before the Century Project began. She was fluent in 7 languages, held black belts in 3 martial arts, and could survive for weeks in hostile environments with minimal equipment. Most importantly, she understood that this training might be for a war she would never live to see. The training program was brutal. Volunteers learned to function in alien atmospheres, extreme temperatures, and high radiation environments. They studied xenobiology until they could recognize and exploit the weaknesses of species they had never encountered. They practiced guerrilla tactics that assumed no backup, no reinforcements, and no hope of extraction. They were taught to think of themselves not as soldiers but as weapons. Single-use weapons that would strike once and disappear. You will probably die, their instructors told them repeatedly. The missions we are preparing you for have no extraction plans because extraction will be impossible. You will go into enemy territory knowing you will not come home. Your success will be measured not by your survival but by how much damage you cause before they kill you. Nobody quit. Every volunteer understood what they were training for. They were humanity's best chance against an empire that should be unbeatable. They were the ones who would go into the dark places and do the terrible things that might give their species a future. They trained knowing they might be training their entire lives for a war that never came, or training for deaths that would be meaningless if humanity fell anyway. The First Contact. 73 years after the Zorathian message arrived, humanity made official first contact with the IGU. 3 massive vessels appeared at the edge of the solar system without warning. They were beautiful in a cold, perfect way. Ships the size of mountains, covered in materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They sent a message in perfect English, clearly translated by technology far beyond human understanding. We are the Interstellar Governance Union. We have come to begin your species evaluation. You have 27 years remaining in your probationary period. Prepare diplomatic representatives to travel to the Galactic Council Station. Your compliance is expected. Resistance will result in immediate quarantine and eventual extinction. The human response was exactly as planned. Earth's diplomats expressed gratitude and eagerness. They prepared to send representatives to the Council Station, a massive structure at the center of IGU territory where all major decisions were made. These diplomats would appear cooperative and somewhat naive. They would ask questions like innocent children learning about a vast new universe. They would seem harmless. Meanwhile, in hidden facilities across Earth and its colonies, the real work continued. Weapons were refined. Soldiers trained. Plans were finalized. The IGU observers watching humanity saw what they expected to see, a young species trying desperately to impress their new masters. They did not see the preparations for war because they were not looking for them. In 50,000 years, no newly discovered species had ever chosen to fight rather than submit. Commander Reynolds, now 68 years old but still sharp and determined, met with President Morrison one final time before the diplomatic mission departed. They stood in the command center deep beneath the Colorado mountains, surrounded by screens showing Earth's defensive preparations. "Do you think we can win?" Morrison asked. She was 71 now, serving her fourth term as president. She had dedicated her entire political career to the Century Project. Reynolds considered the question carefully. "Win? I don't know if that's the right word. Can we survive? Can we remain free? Can we hurt them badly enough that they decide we're more trouble than we're worth? Maybe. Probably not. But we're going to try." Morrison smiled sadly. "My granddaughter asked me yesterday why we're doing this. Why not just join the IGU and accept whatever restrictions they impose? At least we would survive as a species." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that there are things worse than death. I told her that a species that accepts slavery for the illusion of safety deserves neither safety nor freedom. I told her that humanity has always chosen to die on its feet rather than live on its knees." She turned to Reynolds. "Was I wrong?" "No," Reynolds said. "You were exactly right. And 27 years from now, when they come to deliver their judgment, they're going to learn that lesson the hard way." The Judgment Day. When the Council came to Earth. 27 years passed like a held breath. Humanity continued its dual existence, showing one face to the IGU observers while hiding another in classified facilities and encrypted communications. The diplomatic mission to the Galactic Council Station sent back reports that confirmed humanity's worst fears. The IGU was exactly as the Zorathians had described, ancient, powerful, and utterly convinced of its right to rule. The Council Station was a structure almost impossible to comprehend. It hung in space at the center of the galaxy, a sphere 300 kilometers in diameter. Inside, representatives from 3,000 civilizations gathered in chambers built from materials that had no equivalent in human science. The station had existed for 42,000 years. It had witnessed the rise and fall of countless species. It had seen empires born and die. Through it all, the IGU endured. Ambassador David Chen led the human delegation. He was chosen for his patience, his intelligence, and his ability to appear weaker than he actually was. For 27 years, he played the role of humble supplicant perfectly. He attended council sessions where humanity's future was casually discussed by beings who considered Earth's entire history to be a brief moment of cosmic time. He smiled politely when other species made jokes about primitive humans. He asked innocent questions that were really intelligence gathering. And he sent everything he learned back to Earth through quantum-encrypted channels. The reports painted a clear picture. The IGU maintained control through a combination of overwhelming military force and careful economic manipulation. Species that joined were given access to trade networks and technology, but this access was controlled. New members received just enough advancement to become dependent on IGU systems while never receiving enough to become competitive with established powers. They became economic colonies disguised as partners. Military resistance was considered impossible. The IGU fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands of vessels, spread across 3,000 systems. They had weapons that could sterilize planets from orbit, shields that conventional weapons could not penetrate, and technology that seemed almost magical to human understanding. In 50,000 years, only 3 species had ever attempted open rebellion. All 3 were extinct within a decade. The hidden preparations. While Ambassador Chen played diplomat in the Council Station, Commander Reynolds supervised the final preparations on Earth. He was 95 years old now, kept alive and sharp by medical technology that represented humanity's finest achievement. His hair was completely white, his face was lined with a century of stress, but his eyes remained clear and determined. The past 27 years had seen humanity's military capabilities advance beyond what anyone had thought possible. Not through matching IGU technology, which remained impossible, but through perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare. Earth's forces specialized in tactics that ancient empires would never expect from a primitive species. The Biological Warfare Division had created over 300 different targeted pathogens. Each one was designed to affect specific alien physiologies while remaining harmless to humans and most other species. The viruses were subtle, causing confusion and illness rather than immediate death. An infected IGU soldier might experience hallucinations, memory loss, or emotional instability. Medical teams would struggle to diagnose problems they had never encountered before. The Cyber Warfare Division had developed AI-driven malware that could infiltrate quantum communication networks. These programs did not destroy data but corrupted it in ways that were almost impossible to detect. Sensor readings would be wrong by small margins. Navigation calculations would contain tiny errors. Communication timestamps would be slightly off. None of these problems would be immediately catastrophic, but accumulated across an entire fleet, they would create chaos. The Psychological Operations Division had crafted mimetic weapons, ideas designed to spread through alien cultures and undermine IGU authority. Stories of species that had successfully resisted and survived. Questions about why the Council made certain decisions. Comparisons between the freedom species had before joining the IGU and the restrictions they faced after. These ideas were subtle poison, meant to create doubt and dissent over years rather than days. And then there were the soldiers. 10,000 volunteers had completed the special training program. They were ready for missions that had no extraction plans, no backup, and no hope of survival. Each one carried a neural implant that would destroy their brain if they were captured, preventing interrogation. Each one had memorized their objectives and understood that success meant dying alone on an alien world far from home. Lieutenant Maria Santos was now 49 years old and a major in the Special Operations Command. She had spent 23 years training for a war that might never come. She commanded a strike team of 27 soldiers, each one a specialist in infiltration, sabotage, and survival. They did not know what their target would be. They only knew that when the time came, they would go where they were sent and do what needed to be done. The evaluation results. The IGU evaluation team arrived at Earth on the exact day the 100-year probationary period ended. 7 massive vessels entered the solar system and took up positions around Earth. These were not the elegant diplomatic ships that had visited before. These were war vessels, each one carrying enough firepower to destroy a planet. The message was clear. The IGU had made its decision, and resistance would not be tolerated. High Counselor Vex then led the evaluation team. He was a member of the Krell species, tall and insectoid with 4 arms and compound eyes that saw in spectrums humans could not perceive. He had served on the Council for 800 years and had overseen the evaluations of 43 species. Of those 43, only 7 had been admitted to the IGU. The rest had failed and been quarantined to die slowly in isolation. The meeting took place in Geneva, at the United Earth Coalition headquarters. Vex then and his delegation materialized using teleportation technology that represented casual use of principles human physicists were still trying to understand. President Morrison, now 98 years old but still in office, greeted them with appropriate ceremony. The Interstellar Governance Union has completed its evaluation of the human species, Vex then announced in a voice that was translated simultaneously into all human languages. We have observed your development, studied your culture, and assessed your potential threat to galactic stability. We have reached our judgment. The chamber was silent. Every human in the room knew this moment would determine their species' future. What they did not know was that Commander Reynolds and his forces were already moving into position. Weapons were being powered up. Ships were beginning launch sequences. Strike teams were preparing to board their vessels. Everything depended on what came next. Humanity has demonstrated certain admirable qualities, Vex then continued. Your technological advancement has been rapid. Your social organization shows potential for stability. Your scientific achievements, while primitive, show creativity. He paused, and in that pause, something changed in his voice. It became harder, colder. However, humanity has also demonstrated qualities that make you unsuitable for admission to the IGU. You are too aggressive. Your history is filled with warfare and violence. You resist authority and question established order. You value individual freedom over collective stability. These characteristics have been observed before in other species. They always lead to the same outcome: conflict, rebellion, and eventual extinction. Vexthen's compound eyes seem to focus directly on President Morrison. The Council has decided. Humanity is rejected. When humans say no. Morrison stood slowly. She looked old and tired, but her voice was steady. We expected this judgment, she said. We expected it because we learned the truth about your empire. The IGU does not evaluate species to find worthy partners. You evaluate them to find acceptable slaves. Any species strong enough and independent enough to be valuable is automatically considered too dangerous. Any species weak enough to be safe is too pathetic to be worth admitting. Vexthen's expression did not change. Your assessment is irrelevant. The decision has been made. Earth and all its colonies will be placed under permanent quarantine. All contact with the wider galaxy will be forbidden. In time, your species will fade away, and this conversation will be forgotten. No, Morrison said simply. That one word carried the weight of 100 years of preparation. No. Vexthen seemed genuinely puzzled. You misunderstand the situation. You have no choice in this matter. You misunderstand humanity, Morrison replied. We always have a choice. You can quarantine us. You can threaten us with extinction. You can bring your weapons and your ancient empire and your 50,000 years of absolute power. And we can choose to say no. She stepped forward. We reject your judgment. We reject your authority. We reject your empire. And if you try to force us into submission, we will show you what happens when humans decide to fight. The war nobody expected. Vexthen made a gesture with one of his 4 arms. It was meant to be dismissive, casual. Your defiance is noted and irrelevant. You have no weapons that can harm us. You have no technology that can challenge us. You have no allies in the galaxy. You will submit or you will die. Then we'll die, Morrison said. But we'll take as many of you with us as we can. The attack began before Vexthen could respond. It started in 300 locations simultaneously across IGU territory. Human strike teams that had been smuggled into position over the past 5 years activated their weapons. They were not attacking military targets. They were attacking the IGU's greatest weakness, its assumption of absolute superiority. On the agricultural world of Kellis 7, a human team released biological agents into the food distribution network. Within hours, the Krell garrison began experiencing hallucinations and memory loss. On the industrial colony of Praxis Station, malware infiltrated the manufacturing systems. Weapons began rolling off assembly lines with microscopic flaws that would cause them to fail at critical moments. On the diplomatic hub of Centera Prime, mimetic weapons were injected into the planetary information network. Ideas about freedom and resistance began spreading through the population. None of these attacks were immediately catastrophic. None of them destroyed cities or killed millions. But together, they sent a message that echoed across 3,000 star systems: humanity could reach the IGU anywhere. No world was safe. No facility was secure. The primitive species that was supposed to quietly accept its fate was striking back with weapons the ancient empire had never expected. Vexthen received the first reports while still standing in the Geneva headquarters. His compound eyes moved rapidly as he processed information from multiple sources simultaneously. Impossible, he said. You could not have positioned forces across our territory. Our security is absolute. You've ruled for 50,000 years without serious challenge, Morrison replied. You forgot to watch for enemies who don't play by your rules. Our teams have been in place for years, waiting for this moment. They're never coming home. They know that. They chose it anyway. Because that's what humans do when we decide something matters. The IGU fleet around Earth opened fire. Orbital defense platforms disappeared in explosions of incredible power. Coastal cities were hit by weapons that turned sand to glass. Millions died in the first 30 seconds of bombardment. But even as the attack continued, human forces were launching their counterstrike. Small vessels burst from hidden facilities and accelerated toward the IGU warships. These were not fighters designed for combat. They were missiles with human pilots. Each one carried a fusion warhead and a volunteer who had chosen to die taking an enemy vessel with them. The IGU shields could stop conventional weapons, but they had never been tested against ships that deliberately rammed them at relativistic speeds. 3 of the 7 IGU warships died in the first exchange. 3 more were damaged. The survivors retreated beyond the moon, regrouping to reassess an enemy that was not supposed to be able to fight back. Vex then and his delegation teleported to safety aboard their vessels. They had come to deliver judgment. Instead, they found themselves in the first real war the IGU had fought in 10,000 years. The message to the galaxy. Commander Reynolds watched the battle from his command center. His forces were dying by the thousands. Earth's defenses were being systematically destroyed. But the attack was proceeding exactly as planned. Humanity was not trying to win a conventional war. They were trying to send a message, and that message was being broadcast across every communication network in the galaxy. The message was simple. It showed human soldiers fighting against impossible odds. It showed cities burning and people dying. It showed volunteers piloting suicide ships into enemy vessels. And it included Morrison's final address to the galaxy, recorded just before the IGU fleet began their bombardment. "We are humanity," Morrison said into the camera. "We are a young species. We are primitive compared to the ancient empires. We have been judged and found unsuitable for admission to the galactic community. We have been sentenced to isolation and extinction. And we have chosen to fight. This message is for every species in the galaxy who lives under IGU rule. Every civilization that accepted restrictions for the promise of safety. Every world that gave up its freedom because resistance seemed impossible. We want you to see what happens when someone says no. We will probably lose this war. Our weapons are inferior. Our numbers are smaller. Our technology is generations behind theirs. But we will make them pay for every meter of space they take from us. We will make them remember that humans do not kneel. And we will show you that the empire that has ruled for 50,000 years can bleed. The IGU has maintained control because nobody challenged them. Because everyone believed resistance was futile. Because the cost of freedom seemed too high. We are here to prove that wrong. We are here to show you that you have a choice." Morrison's eyes burned with intensity. "Some of you watching this have been members of the IGU for thousands of years. You have forgotten what freedom feels like. You have accepted your place in a system designed to keep you weak and dependent. We cannot free you. We probably cannot even free ourselves. But we can remind you that there was a time before the IGU. And there can be a time after. Humanity is dying. But we are dying on our feet, fighting for the right to determine our own future. And when our last ship falls and our last soldier dies, we want you to remember that we had a choice. We could have submitted. We could have accepted slavery disguised as partnership. We chose war instead. We chose freedom instead. We chose to matter instead of simply surviving." The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, 3,000 species watched in shock. The IGU had always seemed invincible, eternal, unchangeable. Now they saw 7 warships retreating from a supposedly primitive species. They saw an empire bleeding. They saw the impossible becoming real. And in 1,000 different worlds, people began to ask questions they had not dared to ask before. Questions about freedom. Questions about the cost of safety. Questions about whether the galaxy's oldest empire deserved to rule forever. The questions spread like a virus, exactly as the Human Psychological Operations Division had planned. Humanity might be dying, but the ideas would survive. Commander Reynolds closed his eyes for a moment. His forces were being destroyed. Earth would fall within days. The war was lost before it truly began. But as he watched the IGU fleet regrouping, hesitating, uncertain for the first time in millennia, he allowed himself to smile. "We didn't win," he said quietly to the officers around him. "But by God, we mattered." The battle for Earth continued as the galaxy watched and began, slowly, to wake up.